Well, there he is, Mr. George Bush, Judge George W. Bush. And, you know, when these guys get asked about the Order of Skull and Bones, what do? Well, they either lie. George Bush, one time, he says, Skull and Bones? Well, it doesn't exist. It's so secret, it doesn't exist. Or they say the standard little line, oh, well, you know, it's just so secret, I can't talk about it.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it. It's so secret we can't talk about it.
It's so secret we can't talk about it. Can't talk about it. Can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? What does that mean for America?
You know, and not just George W. Bush, but next slide. Our Mr. John Kerry, you know, who is the Democratic nominee for president here, it sure looks like. And, you know, he says basically the same thing. You know, he says, well, they're just so secret I can't talk about it.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Well, my question is, where is their allegiance? Is their allegiance to this select little group, this elite group, or is their allegiance to our country? I don't see it. You know, John Kerry was on the Senate Intelligence Committee. He ran the narcotics trafficking hearings during the Iran-Contra. Officially, George H.W. Bush is out of the loop in Iran-Contra. I mean, we all know that he wasn't. There's tons of researchers that have found all kinds of stuff that says he was. But officially, George H.W. Bush was out of the loop. Officially, Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy. And officially, the CIA doesn't do drugs. And anybody who says differently, okay, I mean, it's amazing. I've been looking at this a long time, and so I run across these reporters who think they've run across the story of their life, and they have, and they think it's going to make their career. And it does, but not in the way they hope it to do. Basically, they don't work for a major daily newspaper anymore, and they got to deal with, you know, a hippie up in Oregon to try and get their books published and get out there, because it's amazing what this country has been turned into, and they haven't even told us yet, you know. Next slide. That's my dad. And, you know, he was just my dad, you know. He didn't know much about it. He didn't talk, you know, about working for the CIA. I mean, I've got an older brother and an older sister. We would talk about it. My dad would never talk about it. He never talked about it, you know, at the dinner table or anything and whatnot. But when I started to become a hippie, growing my hair long and smoking a little marijuana, my dad, he was concerned about that. And, you know, and I, you know, I was a teenager and I knew it all anyway and whatnot. So it just didn't make much sense to me what my dad told me. I'm going to tell you what my dad told me, and I've told this story many times, but it really means a lot exactly what he said. And he said, first off, he asked me what I thought of the Vietnam War. And, you know, I was raised on John Wayne and World War II. All my uncles were in World War II. And I give a flip little answer to my dad. I say, we got a sack of hand grenades and some rice patties, and you go throw them and win it for the good guys wearing the white hats, you know. And he says we had to have a talk. And he waited a while till there was this gentleman from Nashville, Tennessee, from Vanderbilt, Dr. D.F. Fleming in town. And he said it was time to have that talk. And he took me in my little brother's room downstairs and sat me down, and he looked at me and he says, the Vietnam War is about drugs. There's these secret societies behind it. And I'm thinking, okay, the mafia. He's talking about the mafia, you know. And then he says, and communism's all a sham. These same secret societies are behind it. It's all a big game. And I'm thinking, gee, Dad, you're nuts. What are you talking about, you know? And then it comes in my, oh, you're having a drug talk with me. This is what's going on, you know? And I'm kind of waiting for him to say, you know, don't stop smoking pot and stuff and whatnot. Well, So I'm kind of going on automatic pilot and they're listening and they're talking and they basically tell me that when Eisenhower had come aboard, he had asked for an assessment report about what was going on in the world. And my father, like the lady said, he'd been branch chief head of East Asia for research and analysis, was his last overt job with the CIA, and then he went covert for some years, and we'll get into that. And he was in G2 and OSS at the same time, and very few people were in that. And basically what that means is that you have two sets of books, because G2 is military intelligence, OSS is the executive branch intelligence. Well, they don't always tell each other everything they know and whatnot. And it was, they had to sheep-dip my dad to put him in G2 because MacArthur and General Willoughby didn't want him on the staff. And then after World War II, he also did a study of the Japanese use of heroin during the World War II and before that, and their use of it both as a political weapon and as a means of creating money. And so, he told me these things, and I was sitting there, and I just didn't have no idea what he was talking about. And later on, we would have some arguments because I continued to smoke marijuana, and I didn't really see anything wrong with it. And in these arguments, what it got down to was he was very, very concerned about me getting hooked on heroin. And we had this one argument one time where basically he told me, he says, there's this plan to get all you kids here hooked on heroin. And I said, Dad, I says, I really don't see it. I really don't care about heroin and whatnot. I just smoke a little pot now and then. And he didn't really see much difference between pot and heroin and whatnot. And he just kind of turned and spat out this thing. He says, you are just going to be making money for them. And the way he said them, I will just never forget, because it just had all this vitrifusion in it and whatnot. So, I took what he said there and, went on with my life. And I was looking into, the Kennedy assassination and whatnot, and was reading some things about that. And it said in there in probably some girly magazine I was reading, a story about the Kennedy assassination. They were leading all the different theories. And in one of these things they said, well, maybe there's some people that say there was a secret society involvement with it. And that brought back this conversation that I had with my father. And so I started to look into it more. And I had a hard time finding out different information about it. And let's go on to the next slide here. This is a gentleman here. This is Colonel Lansdale. And if you've looked into conspiracy literature at all, Colonel Lansdale is a very interesting fellow. He was the prototype of two books, The Ugly American and The Other American. He was one of the first Americans to go into Vietnam after the French left. And one of the things that he did there very early on was he took over the Golden Triangle from the French, and he didn't just say, oh, well, we're here, we'd like to do it. There was actual shooting war between two Western intelligence agencies. It didn't happen very often. The French were running it with the Corsicans, and we brought in our own Corsicans and then brought in the Sicilians. Well, because my dad was an expert on the Philippines, and Lansdale worked in the Philippines and then worked in Vietnam, he relied on my dad for a lot of information and would work with him. Let's go on to the next slide. Lansdale used to come over to the family house. They're, old-fashioned family. They used to have a guest book there, and people would come over and they'd sign it there. And so you can see Mr. Lansdale. He was at my parents' 10th wedding anniversary. I was probably sleeping or crying in the background. Who knows? Next slide. This is a picture of Colonel Lansdale in 1956 in Vietnam.